Somewhere along the way, you had a picture in your mind. Maybe it was the children who would be close, who would call on Sundays, who would bring the grandchildren over without needing to be asked. Maybe it was the health you assumed you would still have, the friendships that would still be alive, the feeling of purpose that you thought would simply arrive once the hard years were behind you. The actual life, the one you are living right now. And the gap between the two is quietly one of the most painful things a person can carry. Let's begin. The first thing I want to say is something that our culture does not say often enough. We live in a world that tells us to focus on the positive, to count our blessings, to be grateful for what we have. And there is wisdom in that. But when we use gratitude as a way to silence the honest ache of a life that did not unfold as we hoped, we are not healing anything. We are simply pushing it down. And things pushed down do not disappear. They just wait. He taught us to look clearly, honestly, and without flinching at what is actually true. And what is true for many of us in the second half of life is this: not out of greed, not out of selfishness, but out of hope, out of the very human tendency to invest our hearts in a future we were certain we would one day reach. And when that future turns out to be different from the one we imagined, the grief of that is real. It deserves to be named. Not fixed, not rushed past, named. The Buddha began his teaching with a word. That word was dukkha. Dukkha is usually translated as suffering, but that translation is too blunt. It sounds like screaming, like crisis, like dramatic pain. Dukkha is quieter than that. The original meaning of the word comes from a wheel whose axle is slightly off-center. The wheel still turns. The cart still moves. But there is a persistent wobble, a roughness, a subtle wrongness that never quite resolves. That is dukkha, the low hum of a life that is not quite fitting together the way you thought it would. The Buddha identified several forms of dukkha. The one that matters most for us today is called Viparinama-dukkha. Viparinama means change, transformation, the shifting of things from one form to another. Viparinama-dukkha is the suffering that comes not from dramatic loss or crisis, but from the quiet, steady accumulation of a life that has changed its shape without your permission. The marriage that cooled, the body that slowed, the children who grew up and became strangers in ways you didn't anticipate, the self you were at 40 that seems to belong to someone else now, the suffering of things not staying the way they were. But here is what the Buddha wanted us to understand. The pain of change is not the same thing as something going wrong. Change is the nature of all conditioned things. Every season ends. Every relationship transforms. Every version of ourselves gives way to the next. This is not failure. This is not punishment. This is simply what it means to be alive in a world that does not stand still. The suffering does not come from the change itself. The suffering comes from expecting things not to change, and then grieving, sometimes for years, when they do. I want to tell you a story. It is an old story, the kind that circulates in different forms across many wisdom traditions, but it carries something very specific that I want you to hear today. There was once a king who had ruled his kingdom for many years. He was not a cruel king. He was not a greedy king. He was, by most measures, a good king. But he was deeply unhappy, because the king had a plan for his life. A very specific plan. He had imagined a son who would rule after him, strong, wise, beloved. He had imagined a kingdom that would grow, larger and more peaceful, under his stewardship. He had imagined a queen who would grow old beside him, with grace and tenderness. The son had died young. The kingdom had faced drought and rebellion. The queen had grown distant, in ways that no one spoke about. The king's life had not turned out the way he planned. One morning, the king was riding outside the palace walls when he came upon an old beggar sitting beneath a tree. The beggar was singing, not a sad song, a joyful one, a simple song about the morning light and the smell of the earth after rain. The king pulled his horse to a stop. He looked at the beggar, this man who had nothing, who slept on the ground, who owned not even the sandals on his feet. And he felt something that surprised him deeply. He felt envy. The king dismounted. He sat beside the beggar under the tree, and after a long silence, he said, "How is it that you are so content? You have nothing, and I have everything, and yet I have not felt peace in longer than I can remember." The old beggar looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "The one in your hands is the kingdom that is. The one in your mind is the kingdom that was supposed to be. You are grieving the second one so loudly that you cannot hear the first one at all." The king sat with those words for a very long time. He had carried two kingdoms his entire life, one real, one imagined, and every day he had judged the real one by the standards of the imagined one and found it wanting. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. Acceptance sounds like giving up. It sounds like saying it doesn't matter. It sounds like pretending that the loss wasn't real, that the disappointment wasn't real, that the grief doesn't deserve to be felt. I want to address this directly, because it is the most common misunderstanding about the Buddha's teaching on acceptance, and it stops so many people from receiving the peace that is available to them. The Buddha is not asking you to say, "This is fine." He is not asking you to pretend that the loss didn't happen, or that it wasn't painful, or that things are the way you wanted them to be. It is not the posture of someone who has stopped caring, stopped hoping, stopped loving. In the Buddhist tradition, acceptance is considered one of the most courageous acts a human being can perform. So what is it, then? Acceptance, in the Buddhist sense, is simply this: not to like it, not to be glad about it, not to pretend it is something other than it is. Simply to stop spending your life's energy arguing with what has already happened. Because here is what the Buddha observed. When we fight the truth of what is, when we spend our days comparing the life we are living to the life we wish we were living, we are not changing anything. We are not making the past different. We are not making the present better. We are simply suffering twice. Once for what happened, and once for refusing to stop, wishing it hadn't. The Buddha offered an image that I have returned to many times. He said, when a person is struck by an arrow, it is painful. But when that same person then shoots themselves with a second arrow, the arrow of self-blame or resentment or the relentless wish that things had been different, the second arrow hurts more than the first. We cannot always prevent the first arrow. Life will bring loss. Life will bring disappointment. Life will not always follow the plan. But the second arrow, the one we aim at ourselves, that one is optional. If you are carrying the gap today, the distance between the life you imagined and the life you have, I want to offer you 3 specific places where that peace can begin. Not 3 steps to follow, not a formula, just 3 honest invitations. Every life is built from choices. Some of those choices felt right at the time and led somewhere painful. Some of them felt wrong at the time and led somewhere you didn't expect. And some of them, the ones that hurt the most to think about, you would give almost anything to go back and change. But you cannot. And the Buddha's teaching is not that your choices didn't matter. It is that the person who made those choices was doing the best they could with the understanding they had at the time they had it. To punish that person now with the wisdom you have gained since, that is the second arrow, and you can lay it down. So much of the gap between the imagined life and the real one is not about what we did. It is about what other people did, how they left, how they changed, how they failed to become who you needed them to be. The Buddha does not ask you to approve of those choices. He does not ask you to pretend they did not hurt you. He asks only this: can you see that those people, too, were doing the best they could with what they had? Not always, not easily, but can you begin to move in that direction? because carrying resentment for another person's choices does not change them. It only continues to change you. Some things that didn't turn out the way you planned were not anyone's fault. The illness that came without warning, the dream that simply didn't survive contact with reality, the chapter of life that ended before you were ready. These are the hardest to make peace with, because there is no one to forgive. There is only the truth, that life is impermanent, that things change, that the gap between the dreamed life and the lived one is simply part of being human. And the invitation, not easy, but real, is to grieve it fully, honestly, and then slowly to turn back toward the life that is still here. I want to offer you a practice. I call it the arriving practice. It takes about 2 minutes, and it can be done anywhere, in your chair, in your garden, lying still before you get up in the morning. Take one full breath in. Let it go completely. Not the life you imagined, not the life you compare to. This one. The room you are in, the body you are in, the morning or evening that is around you right now. Not the one I planned, not the one I grieve, but the one that is, the one that is still happening, the one that is still mine. Not a grand thing, not a consolation prize, just one true thing. The light, the breath, the cup of tea going warm in your hands, the fact that you are still here, still breathing, still able to feel. That is the practice. Not to forget the gap, not to stop grieving what was lost, but to return, even briefly, even tentatively, to the life that is. Because this life, the real one, the imperfect one, the one that did not go according to plan, this life is the only place where peace is actually possible. The old beggar under the tree did not tell the king to stop wanting his kingdom to have been different. He did not tell him his grief was wrong. He said simply, I think that is true for most of us, some of the time. We carry 2 lives, the one we are living and the one we were supposed to have. And we move through the real one, while grieving the imagined one, never quite arriving in either. It is not to stop hoping, or caring, or wanting things to be better. It is simply to notice there is a life happening here, right now, in this body, in this moment. And that life deserves to be inhabited. You are not off course. You are not a person whose life went wrong. You are a person whose life went differently from the picture. And that is something every human being who has ever lived could say. If this video has offered you something today, I would be honored if you would subscribe to this channel. Each week, I share teachings like this one, drawn from the wisdom of the Buddha, offered gently for the real challenges of life today. Next week, we will sit with something that I know many of you carry. The question of what inner peace actually is, and why searching for it as a feeling may be the very thing keeping it just out of reach. Until then, be gentle with yourself, walk slowly, and remember, the life you are living right now is the only one that is asking to be met.